Warami Mitiga. Hello, friends. I'm meeting with you on the lands of the Toongagal people of the Darug Nation in Western Sydney, Australia. Thank you for joining us online. My name is Jane Kelly, and I am Common Grace's Creation and Climate Justice Coordinator. I have the privilege of hosting today or tonight's launch of the Climate Pastoral Care online resource created by Waterspirit and Jessica Morthorpe. Also joining us today are special guest speakers, Dr. Sally Gillespie, Reverend Talitha Amadea Aho, and Reverend Douglas Kaufman, and with special guest recording from Reverend James Bhagwan. We will formally begin our time together by acknowledging country. Our first acknowledgement comes from Australia and is presented by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Following this, we were privileged to be joined by Al of the Ramapo, Munsee, Lenape Nation.
I am from Wutiti Country and Mubiog Island. I live on Bunwarang Country. Together with younger generations of Aboriginal peoples across these lands now called Australia, and with all of you, we bring an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands, now called Australia, over 300 nations of Aboriginal peoples. The Aboriginal peoples have been and continue to be caretakers and stewards on behalf of the Creator. We declare sovereignty has never been ceded. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and future.
Yama, I'm a proud Gamilaroi man and I live on Gamilaroi country.
Kujiigu, I'm a proud Biripi man and I live on Biripi country.
Yama, Ngai Wallaby Gamilaroi. I'm a proud Gamilaroi man and I live on Gamilaroi country.
I'm a proud Gamilaroi man and I live on Darkinjung country.
I'm a proud Gamilaroi man and I live on Darkinjung country.
I'm a Wiradjuri fella and I live on Wiradjuri country.
My tribe is Dungutty and Biripi and I live on Wongal land.
My tribe is Kamilaroi and I'm living on Wongal land.
My tribe is Wiradjuri and I live on Wongal and Gadigal country.
I'm from Mubiog Island and Wutiti country and I live on Bunurong land.
I'm Watiti and I live on Bunurong country.
Kaya, I am Nunga and I live on Wajak country. Kaya!
I'm Kalkadoon on Bendel country.
I'm Kalkadoon on Bendel country.
I'm Rodrigo and I live on Wanneroo country.
I'm Wiradjuri and I live on a Wabakoo country.
I'm Wiradjuri and I live on a Wabakoo country.
I'm Wiradjuri and I live on a Wabakoo country.
I am Waka Waka and I live on Gubby Gubby country.
We are from Butler and Gamilaroi nations and we live on Turrbal country.
I am Anu. I live in Kurla country.
My country is Pinton Jarrett and I live in Wurundjeri land.
We promise to walk softly and gently upon country and invite you to do the same. May we hear the call of many elders across many nations who say, care for country and country will care for you.
Ninjusinzi Kokos Ramapo, Nini Lenawape, Ato, Munsee, Lenape, Anashi Kishalamokwang, Anashi Kwachi Manitou, Elamiliang, Kakana Ki, Walk, Mbi, Walk, Kashung, Walk, Dindao, Anushik, 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 Anushik. I'm Al from the Ramapo Munsee Lenape Nation, and I greeted you all in the original language of these lands where Waterspirit is based. And what I said in English was, thank you. Well, first of all, I introduced myself and my clan. I'm from the Deer clan of the Munsee people of the Lenape people. And what I said in English was translated as Anashi Kishalamokwang, thank you, who created us from thought, the realization that our thoughts are real as well, not just what we can see and touch and hear, but our thoughts themselves are real. Anashi Kwachi Manitou, oftentimes translated as Great Spirit. I like the term Great Energy because the physics, I believe, captures it best. When they say E is equal to MC squared, that's the equivalence of energy and matter. So when the elders would say that everything in the world has Manitou, the people, the animals, the trees, even the stones, water, air, that's similar to the concept in physics of energy and matter being equivalent or being related. Elamiliang for giving us, Kakanaki, our Mother Earth, the recognition that our Earth, or Mother, is also alive. The Earth breathes. For example, the trees would be the lungs of the Earth. Anashik Mbi, thank you, water. I mean, it's not so much that we have rights to water, which we do, but on a more fundamental level, we are water. We're water beings. 60% of our bodies are water. By some accounts, maybe even more than 90%, because water is in every structure and cell in our bodies. Anashik, wind. You know, without breath, we're not going to last but minutes. And then finally, Anashik Tindao, fire. Technology. It's not that Indigenous people are anti-technology. It's being thankful for technology and a healthy respect for technology. So it's a pleasure to be here in friendship with the original peoples there in Australia, because I was just at a conference and we were talking about fire as a water conference and how to protect the water. But we were talking about how some seeds will only germinate, will only open up if there is a fire. So fire is not an enemy. It's a question of how do we work with fire. And I heard that the people in Australia still retain that knowledge. And that to me is very exciting to hear. So the Munsee language, I really welcome the opportunity to speak that because I'm learning language again myself. It was almost killed off, but we're bringing it back. Actually, New York's the most linguistically diverse region on the planet, but only until recently has Munsee been spoken again as an active language. But it really is the language of the earth and this place. Manhattan is a word meaning land of many hills. The river they call the Hudson River in our language is called the Mahikanatuk, the river that flows both ways. So our language really reflects the reality of the earth itself. And the earth is our church. And the earth is our scripture. The waters and the mountains are our scriptures. So I just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to do this land acknowledgement. I always like to acknowledge the land in the acknowledgement. So thank you so much on behalf of the Ramapo Munsee Lenape people, and greetings from Chief Perry, who's the leader of our nation. Thank you. Anashi.
Thank you, Al, for that acknowledgement of country. Before we turn our attention to the Climate Pastoral Care online resource itself, I'd like to lead us in a prayer. This prayer, written by Father Thomas Keating, is called the Welcoming Prayer. The Welcoming Prayer is a method of consenting to God's presence and action in our physical and emotional reactions to events and situations in daily life. The purpose of the Welcoming Prayer is to deepen our relationship with God through consenting in the ordinary activities of our day. The Welcoming Prayer can be done in a moment, in a breath, or it can be used for a longer contemplative time. Let us pray. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I open to the love and presence of God and God's actions within. Amen. I now have the pleasure of formally introducing Jessica Morthorpe. I'm just going to add a spotlight to it so that you can all meet her. And Blair Nelson. So hopefully everyone can see them. Jessica is a Christian environmentalist with a passion for climate psychology, ecotheology, and endangered species. She has been involved in environmental ministry for over 14 years, both ecumenically and within the Uniting Church in Australia. Jessica is the founder and director of 5 Leaf Eco Awards, an Australian-wide ecumenical environmental change program for churches and religious organisations. And she has also worked in intergenerational ministry with multiple churches and in climate advocacy and community climate engagement. In 2019 and 2020, Jessica initiated the first 2 of their kind climate pastoral care conferences, bringing psychologists and relevant experts together with church leaders from around Australia and beyond, if I recall correctly, Jess. The success of these events and the individual stories shared by participants made it clear that there is a significant need for more church leaders who are equipped to assist with climate anxiety, grief, and emotions. This online course is one attempt to address this need. Blair Nelson is the Executive Director of Waterspirit. Blair is an innovative leader in the field of religion and ecology, and she brings a multi-faith international perspective to this work after years of experience living in Brazil and Venezuela. Blair received her Master of Arts in Religion from the Yale Divinity School and her Bachelor of Arts with honours in Environmental Studies at Brown University. She also represents the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace at the United Nations, where she is actively engaged in faith-based environmental collaborations. And if these aren't enough strings to her bow, Blair is also fluent in Portuguese and Spanish and has experience with tropical agroecology and permaculture. Waterspirit is a non-profit centre for spiritual ecology sponsored by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. Through programs, education and advocacy, Waterspirit inspires, informs and enables all people to deepen their consciousness of the sacredness of water and all creation. Waterspirit was founded in New Jersey, USA in 1998 and has offered the Good Grief Networks program called 10 Steps to Personal Resilience and Empowerment in a Chaotic Climate since 2019. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm calling in from Jajawarong country, and I would like to acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging. Blair and I are both really excited to have you all here today to celebrate the launch of this course. We connected around a shared passion for climate action and concern about the impacts of climate distress on members of our churches and communities. We passionately believe that churches have the opportunity to play a pivotal role in helping people with their climate emotions and helping our society to find better and more equitable ways forward for all people and all of creation. When we first discussed these issues together, we realized that there was a bit of a gap. Christian ministers, priests, pastors, pastoral care leaders or teams, chaplains, youth workers, Sunday school leaders, and other church leaders have very few opportunities to undertake training around climate psychology and to learn how to provide pastoral care for those experiencing climate distress, or to learn how climate anxiety, for example, differs from other forms of anxiety and needs to be approached slightly differently. Doug Kaufman has been running some awesome retreats for ministers around these topics for years, and Waterspirit has been running, as mentioned, the Good Grief Network 10-step programs. And I organised the 2 conferences in 2019 and 2020 to bring together experts in climate psychology and church leaders for the first time. And it was actually really interesting to see the shift between the 2 conferences. So in 2019, when we first brought people together, we had to do a lot of explaining about what climate pastoral care was and what our vision was for bringing together the climate psychologists and the ministers. And people often hadn't even heard of climate anxiety, whereas by 2020, we'd just had the Black Summer bushfires. And so suddenly people knew what climate anxiety was, and many Australians had directly experienced it in the months before that conference. So that was a real explosion in interest in this field. But there was no thorough and systematic training available that church leaders could complete in their own time that specifically dealt with climate emotions and pastoral care. So we decided to work together to create this course. We really hope that this course will be a valuable resource for many and will help to build a network of pastors and church leaders who are aware of and equipped to assist with climate distress all over Australia and the US, and perhaps even broader than that. So now I'll hand over to Blair to introduce the first of our wonderful expert panelists, who will be sharing with us some of their insights into climate pastoral care from their own contexts and perspectives, and why they think this new course is so important.
Yes, it wasn't enough for us to just launch the course out into the world. We had to make it an event where we could invite these experts in the field whose work has inspired and influenced us, and to give people one more opportunity to understand what are climate emotions, what is climate pastoral care, and what can be done to help our communities who are experiencing these impacts. So don't worry, by the end of tonight, we will actually tell you how to take the course. But before then, I am thrilled to introduce our first speaker. Could not be here in person, unfortunately. He is fantastic, but he has sent us along a recorded message. So it is my pleasure to introduce Reverend James Bhagwan. The Reverend James Bhagwan is from Fiji and currently serves as the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches, the peak ecumenical organization in the Oceania region. Birthed in 1961, today the PCC consists of 33 member churches and 10 national councils of churches across 18 Pacific Island states and territories, and comprising some 70% of the Pacific's human population. The PCC's key focus areas over the last 6 decades include ecumenism, political, economic, social, and cultural self-determination, including youth engagement and empowerment, and child protection and gender justice, as well as ecological stewardship and climate justice. And I know that Reverend Bhagwan has been personally engaged in this climate pastoral care and climate emotional work on the ground in these specific communities where the impacts are immediate and urgent. So with that, let's turn things over to Reverend James.
Warm Christian greetings to you all, and my sincere appreciation for this opportunity to share a few words as you launch this very important online course on how we need to engage on climate pastoral care. I bring you first and foremost warm Pacific greetings from your Pacific Conference of Churches family. And as I speak, we are preparing in many different ways for COP27, the 27th Conference of Parties on climate change in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. For some of us engaged in this work for a long period of time, we are suffering from fatigue in many respects. Pacific communities who have continued to be asked for their stories on their experience of climate change are suffering from the fatigue of telling these stories and waiting for help as they continue to experience the impacts of climate change. And of course, just recently in Australia, you have experienced already the extreme weather patterns that should not be happening yet. We have not yet entered into the cyclone season technically, but of course, due to climate change, this is what's happening in our world today. extreme weather patterns, longer extreme weather periods, rising sea levels, droughts, floods. Our sisters and brothers in Kiribati and Tuvalu are experiencing the worst drought in their history. And we continue to work and support communities that are affected in many different levels from climate change. We continue to see the impact of rising seas, the impact of, as I said, the droughts, the uncertainty of what life looks like with the slow movement in the COP process for adequate funding, for adaptation, for mitigation, how you deal with the impacts of climate change in communities, and of course, the issue of loss and damage, the issue of possible relocation, which is not just for Pacific communities, but are now being discussed all over the world as more and more communities experience the impact of climate change. For the Pacific Conference of Churches, we began to seriously look at the impact on communities from climate change from the 2004 Osintai Declaration. Osintai, O-T-I-N-T-A-I, is a Kiribati word that means sunrise. That declaration was made in 2004 in Kiribati and followed up by the Moana Declaration by church leaders, which first really began to look at issues around climate-induced displacement and relocation, the practical issues around relocation, but more importantly, the psychosocial, the traumatic spiritual implications for people of faith, people of deep indigenous spirituality, who find themselves faced with this existential crisis of leaving the home to which they find themselves rooted, the homes in which they have lived for generations, multiple generations, and what their future looks like today. And of course, the process of relocation for those communities who have already begun to engage in that process has been quite difficult because it's being done on an ad hoc basis with relocation guidelines and standard operating procedures only now being developed as relocations happen. One of the challenges we face very early on in the context of climate change was, of course, the question by our communities of, why is God doing this to me? What have I done to earn the wrath of God in this way? And part of our work has been to explain climate change and the impacts as human-caused, climate-induced disasters and displacements, not God striking down communities in some sort of punishment. And this is something that's very, very important that we will continue to deal with. And just a few days ago, I was on an island called Kioa, where we worked with the local communities, worked with civil society organizations to issue a climate emergency declaration from the communities of Pacific civil society. And the theme under which we gathered was Tears of Resilience. And, from the Pacific Conference of Churches, we take very seriously our reflections around Psalm 137, singing the Lord's song in a strange land, where the Israelites have been taken into exile and they're in Babylon, they're being oppressed by communities, they're dislocated, they're alienated, they're spiritually bereft as they try to figure out what does it mean to sing songs of community, songs of faith and spirituality in a place where they are far removed from everything they know, where instead of experiencing God's shalom and peace, they're experiencing the real difficulties of forced relocation. In our work, we often look at the pastoral work around dealing with grief, the 5 stages of grief. And this is something that in the work on climate-induced disasters and pastoral care for communities, you need to kind of engage in, this from the process of denial, of anger, bargaining, of depression, acceptance, and then moving on. Happens, of course, in different ways, in different order. But you can see this particularly happening in the context of climate change with communities. Of course, the first thing many people have been doing is denying that climate change actually happens. That's a coping mechanism. How can we deal with something at that level? We work in multiple levels. While we are dealing with the mind and the soul, we have to provide for the body as well. And these are going to be times where the pastoral work will need to engage in practical aspects. How do you provide that sense of resilience, for helping people do something when they feel helpless in the context of climate change? And so, a lot of our work has been around being prophetic, and those who are affected by climate change being advocates of responses to climate change, addressing the climate emergency, advocates on the needs for adaptation, climate financing, loss and damage, including what we call the non-economic loss and damage, recognizing those deep spiritual trauma. And this is all being recognized now. And the question is, how do we as church, as Christians, engage in that particular process? And so this workshop, or this training with how to engage with pastoral care on the climate crisis will continue to increase. And it is happening everywhere. The bushfires in Australia were an example of this. And as I mentioned, the extreme weather that you've just been experiencing in the last few days. And so for us as PCC, we are really actually quite excited with this course. We're already looking to see whether it is a possibility for us to be part of this training program and work it into the engagements that we do with our member churches across the region. And this is important because we need to show that we're all working together, that this is something that we can do to maintain community and continue to give hope to communities. And ultimately, that is what it's about. In the time where we're talking about planetary crisis, in a time when we're talking about life on Earth, in the time when we're talking about people experiencing something that they could never imagine taking place, and increasing impacts, hope is very important. And so our role as healers of the community, the prophetic, the pastoral, and the practical roles that we play, even as we too face our fears, face the uncertainty of climate change and how we address that. I think that is something also that we can use at this time to journey with communities and say to our congregations that, you're not alone. You're with people all around the world who are going through this. And for those of us who are people of faith, who follow the way of Christ, we are reminded that life, not death, has the final say, that love and compassion eventually wins the order of the day. And so that gives us hope and strength in the work that we are called to do. I wish you well as you launch this program, and I look forward to seeing how the Pacific Conference of Churches and our member churches can engage in this program and support you. May God bless you all. Naka. Thank you.
Much gratitude to Reverend Bhagwan for that message of support and for reaching beyond the storytelling fatigue to continue to share that urgent message with us. It is now my pleasure to move into the portion with our featured speakers who are live in the Zoom room with us tonight. I'd like to gently remind all speakers that you have about 10 minutes to share with us. We could listen to you all night, but we really want to make sure that we have enough time for you all to respond to each other and to take some questions from the audience as well. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Sally Gillespie here tonight. She is an active member of Psychology for a Safe Climate, an Australian organization, as well as the Climate Psychology Alliance based in the UK, where she facilitates workshops, writes, and gives talks. As a former psychotherapist, Sally researched the psychological terrain of climate engagement for her PhD at Western Sydney University, where she has also lectured on eco-psychology and cultural change. Sally's book, Climate Crisis and Consciousness, Reimagining Our World and Ourselves, came out in 2020, and it explores the psychological challenges and developmental processes of climate awareness within individuals and societies. Dr. Gillespie, it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Blair. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here today with you. I want to start acknowledging that I am here today on the land of the Gadigal and Wangal people, and to acknowledge them and pay my respects and express great gratitude for the care for country that has happened for millennia here with traditional owners. We have so much to learn from traditional ecological knowledge. You know, as was mentioned earlier in terms of fire management and so on, we're just learning all the time, and I am deeply grateful and respectful for that care. So I want to start by congratulating Jess and Blair for the tremendous work and the commitment to produce this vital and groundbreaking resource for faith-based communities. The course is just so well researched. I'm really impressed by the research that's gone into this. It's wide-ranging in its scope and concerns, and it's importantly very holistic and complex in its approaches. I believe it's also a valuable prototype for many other communities. I'm thinking here carers, policymakers, educators, health workers, researchers, and so on, because it has such a well thought out analysis of an engagement with climate related emotions and distress. And it also brings this in with systemic perspectives which support individual, collective, and ecological healing and social change. So the achievement of this course and the scope of this course, I think, is truly groundbreaking, and I hope it is widely referenced and used. My role here today is to speak as a climate psychologist. Only 10 years ago, this field barely existed, but now, sadly, we are in hot demand. And that's a pretty black humour pun. As this course charts, the impact on mental health is getting more and more severe as the climate crisis deepens. There's a statistic in the course about 1 in 5 experiencing climate-related distress in Australia in 2019. Now, we know that's far higher by now, and right across the globe, all the recent research is showing that the vast majority of our global population feels a great deal of climate change concern. So the authors remind us and beautifully discuss the ways that we need to be sensitive to the socio-political factors affecting the eco-emotions of people. It's not a level playing field. And particularly for Indigenous communities, as we've just heard from our previous speaker, the grief over the climate and interrelated eco-coast destructions is immense. And it has been there through centuries of colonization, when the ecological destructions and the interruptions of traditional care for country practices happened. And now, sadly, right on the front line, and particularly, you know, looking at what's happening with displacement and resettlements of communities. So it's one thing to anticipate climate and ecological destructions and to be informed about it, and it's quite another to have the ongoing lived experience. As the authors emphasize, climate anxiety, and more broadly speaking, climate distress, is a rational and sane response to an existential threat, which should never be pathologized or labeled as individual mental illness. In Psychology for Safe Climate presentations, we often quote Graham Lawton, who wrote in The New Scientist that what we are witnessing isn't a tsunami of mental illness, but a long overdue outbreak of sanity in his analysis of eco-anxiety. And I couldn't agree more. No, this is not, however, to deny that in some cases, ongoing climate anxiety, grief, despair can and does contribute to clinical anxiety or depression. And this most especially can happen when it's not well validated, understood, or supported. Then individual help may be required, grounded in the knowledge that climate fears, griefs, and despairs are valid and required societal responses. And Psychology for Safe Climate has on its website a directory of climate-aware practitioners who can provide just this sort of awareness and support. This course not only supports and educates faith-based carers to understand that climate distress in themselves and their family and parishioners is not only a normal and reasonable response to what is happening, but it's also a sign of connection to and care for our living world. Caroline Hickman, a leading climate psychologist, says that first and foremost, when we bring up in responding to climate distress, first and foremost, we need to be understood and to be listened to and to be cared about, and to be engaged with compassionately, both in ourselves and others, but most importantly of all, to find community. The climate crisis should never be positioned as an individual struggle or burden, and this is a basic premise of this course. I want to particularly emphasize the first point that the authors make when they talk right at the beginning about investing in the journey of this course. And they write, don't go it alone. This is a collective crisis and responsibility. It should not be borne as an individual burden, nor can we get our heads and hearts around it individually. Individual self-soothing, sense-making, and indeed action only extend so far when the origins, effects, and necessary responses to climate threats are collectively and socially organised. Coming to terms with this reality and the enormity of its disruptions and threats requires the input of multiple perspectives of lived experience. And as the authors advise here, do seek discussion partners, or better still, form a group to work through this course. This is far the best way to do it. And I can promise you, if you do this within a group or with one or two companions, it will be a really rich, moving and transformative journey. Climate psychology research, including my own, shows that conversations with trusted others who are authentic about their own emotional processes of grappling with climate realities and existential threat enables the exploration of psychological defenses, conflicts, and supports, internal and external. And this helps people to consciously integrate the threats of ecological breakdown, easing feelings of isolation, guilt, grief, fears, and traumatic reactions, as well as, ways of denying and distancing ourselves from this tragic reality. And it also facilitates responsive action. Another climate psychologist, Sally Weintraub, observes that when people are able to engage with climate realities, often after emerging from that collective psychic retreat of denial, it is quite common to feel really re-energized and a lot more alive. However, she cautions that at this time we are also vulnerable. We need the support of a culture of care that values truth and provides a non-persecutory atmosphere. We need the grounding that an understanding of politics can provide, all of which help us to gain a sense of proportion when trying to work through feelings of distress, such as anxiety, shame, guilt, and powerlessness. Now, what she writes is very true. We do need a politically, psychologically, and ecologically informed culture of care to support ourselves and others grapple with the realities of climate crisis. But there can be more. For religious and spiritual communities, faith-based understandings and practices offer solace, companionship, meaning, purpose, and collaborative action on the ground in ways that this course deeply explores and expertly facilitates. So I do emphasize how important it is to gain all these benefits and to really be able to care for climate distressed individuals and communities. The importance of finding support and expression, and learning how to identify and work for the carer to learn how to identify and work with the parallel processes within themselves and others. This is something we have to do as climate psychologists constantly. No one is outside of this. We are all in it together. I could not do ongoing work that I do without my own very regular meetings of support, their dream groups, their dialogue circles, and climate cafes to share my own and to digest experience alongside others. What makes this course remarkable is that it offers far more than current counselling, therapy, and psychology trainings. So think about that. You know, what you've done here, Jess and Blair, is much more support and training here than the majority of counsellors and psychotherapists are getting currently. And what so impresses me about what the authors have achieved in this course includes great content, up-to-date and evidence-based resources, a wealth of supportive offerings and practices in the form of theological reflections, prayers, discussion topics, storytelling, and journal writing prompts, along with some very grounded, wonderful assignments, and all of which can be worked through with others to deepen and enriching carers' engagement with both climate issues and faith. So please don't just read and recommend this course to others, but fully experience it in community, supporting psychological and spiritual healing for yourself alongside others, while contributing the ongoing work of social and cultural change for reparation and restoration of all that lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gillespie, for your warm words. Thank you for drawing our attention to the importance of the collective, both in understanding these traumas and in working out our tools to carry forth together. And thanks for drawing our attention to the social political factors at play in our climate emotions and responses to these times. I'd like to remind all of our viewers tonight that you are warmly invited to pop questions into the chat as they might come up, so that we have a few teed up all ready to go when we get to our Q&A session. And now I would like to turn to our third speaker of the evening. It is with very great joy that I welcome Doug Kaufman to the floor now. He is the Director of Pastoral Ecology at the Anabaptist Climate Collaborative, formerly the Center for Sustainable Climate Solutions, and pastor of Benton Mennonite Church in Goshen, Indiana, USA. He holds a Master's of Theology in Ecology from the University of Toronto. His interest in ecology developed when he started baptizing members in the Elkhart River, which sometimes is not safe for bodily contact because of elevated manure levels. So he's used to holding complexity in hand. Doug, thank you so much. I turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Blair. And first of all, I also wish to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the traditional lands of the Potawatomi. I'm grateful for their stewardship of this land for generations. I give thanks to Creator and give thanks for the reconciling work of the Spirit and seek to live in right relations with these neighbors and all creation. Secondly, I'm just honored to be here with you all tonight in support of this project. Jess and Blair have worked so hard to bring this to fruition, and I really believe in them and want to do all I can do to promote their work. Jess has been an inspiration to me with, as far as I know, the two pastoral care conferences are still the only national level conferences on pastoral care for climate. That it's something that I would like to see here in the U.S. at some point. Blair, along with Abby Koshak, guided me in not just talking about climate emotions to other people, but helping me find ways to express and engage my own complicated emotions around the climate crisis, one of their 10-step support groups for eco-anxiety using the Good Grief Network process helped me at a time of great emotional pain. I thought I'd approach this time autobiographically, and partly that's rather than trying to speak for others, I'm more convinced that each of us needs to speak vulnerably from our own experience and knowledge, that we can make connections and be part of strengthening the web of life needed to confront the crises we're facing. And my own journey into pastoral care for climate was paying attention to my own experience. As I more fully engage the climate crisis, I come as a middle-class, middle-income, middle-aged, but highly educated male living in a small city in middle America. And for me, the two most important middles in that list is middle class and middle America, because both that socioeconomic location and that geographical, or you might even call it atmospheric location, have shielded me from the most adverse effects of climate change. And I think that's why I was drawn into what Dr. Carrie Norgard noticed when she researched the social psychology of climate change in a small town in Norway. And she was there in one of the warmest winters in their history. And yet, even though Norwegians believe the science of climate change, and even though they love winter, they hardly ever spoke about climate change. It made them uncomfortable to do that. It brought up feelings they preferred to keep submerged. For though they saw themselves as environmentalists, they were also wealthy from the exploitation of their oil reserves in the North Sea. So, building on the work of other social psychologists working on other issues, Norgard came to describe this as the social organization of denial. For the denial she was seeing was not an outright or literal denial, but an implicatory denial, a denial of the moral, social, and political implications of climate change. And that's the kind of denial we mean when we say that someone is in denial about their out-of-control alcohol consumption, or that their relationship is failing, or even that a loved one is terminally ill. That person may in fact know the truth, but because the truth hurts so much, they act as if it's not really happening. So denial helps us avoid feelings of helplessness, feelings of guilt about how our lifestyle is destroying the planet, feelings of fear and anxiety produced by the sense of a looming, creeping disaster. I could see how this denial worked in me as a longtime environmental activist who is not more fully engaged in the climate crisis. I wanted to work on things that were practical and personal rather than social or political. I had enough trouble maintaining emotional equilibrium in the midst of so much struggle in my life, as the church conference where I was working was splitting apart, and as I was struggling to engage my own family's difficulties and my emotional responses to all of this. And so finally, as the depth of my child's health struggles became apparent, and as the end of my marriage became real, I moved into the deeper emotional reality of grief. And as I started to realize how grief was working in my life at that time, I came to discover Renee Lertzman, who brought a psychoanalytic frame to this crisis. Her research uncovered the myth of apathy. It's not so much that people don't care about the environmental and climate crises, it's that they cared so much that they keep it buried deep in their subconscious. As I traced this fraught emotional landscape in myself and what I heard and read from companions on the journey, I wondered how I could bring my pastoral theology and practice into this situation, and so I discovered people like pastoral theologian Panu Pikala, who engaged with Norgard and was the author who introduced me to Lertzman's work. So here I am as a pastor, and I haven't considered myself all that emotionally intelligent, working to help people articulate their feelings about the climate crisis. And here I am as a pastor who is more a teacher and preacher than a worship leader, helping people engage those complicated emotions around the climate crisis through ritual action. And building on Pikala's work and on my own experience these past number of years, there's several roles that I think pastors have where we can have a particular impact. One is that we're leaders of ritual. I see ecological lament as critical. My intuitive sense is that ritual action helps us to go to these unconscious places in our minds and bodies where some of these complicated emotions reside. So doing things like burying laments in the ground, it does something that words alone cannot do. Lament in particular can somehow lead us oddly to renewal. And this comes from another aspect of being a pastor, which is that we carry spiritual traditions and teaching. We are educators and preachers. I believe in the gospel of all creatures, which comes out of my Anabaptist Mennonite tradition, that Christ is present not just in the human part of creation, but in all creation. So when any creature suffers, Christ suffers. And the resurrection of Christ is hope for the transformation of our suffering into greater life. So engaging lament can lead us to greater hope, to more action rather than withdrawal. And finally, pastors are leaders of communities. We convene groups for discussion and action. Our congregations can open a space for people to engage in the emotional and spiritual work needed. But this isn't just so that we can, as Sally was talking about, to just sort of placate our emotional distress. The purpose of this engagement is to change our ways and to join together with the Spirit of life in all creation, to join with all those who are strengthening the web of life for all creation. So I'm excited about how this course can train us to be pastors working towards this purpose. This is a little bit of my story from my context. I appreciate how the course works with a different context that talks about climate pastoral care for peoples of the land, for natural disaster response, for climate migrants, for climate activists and scientists. We need to work towards social change, and I'm excited about how this course can help that happen. And I'm already starting to talk to some of the people that I've engaged with over the years on these issues to begin working through the course together. So thank you.
Doug, thank you so much for personally and professionally sharing your stories and the role and impact that pastors can have in their communities where they deliberately engage with climate change and with climate emotions and climate pastoral care. We're so excited for you to take the course, and thank you for the support all throughout. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker on the panel. Author and Reverend Talitha Amadea Aho is a chaplain at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, Oakland, and a minister member of the Presbytery of San Francisco. Recently, she served as a pastor at Montclair Presbyterian Church, the largest Presbyterian congregation in Oakland, California, where she was responsible for children and youth programs. She has been in ministry to the young since she was old enough to qualify as a chaperone, both at church camps and churches on the East Coast, and with the nonprofit organization Children of Uganda. And I'd also like to note that she is the author of a wonderful book that came out earlier this year called In Deep Waters, Spiritual Care for Young People in a Climate Crisis. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Talitha, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all for having me here, and thank you for your work on this important work of bringing all these resources together. I'm so glad that there are starting to be so many resources, but you're really organizing it and guiding people and helping them, and I appreciate that so much. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone here in what we now call Oakland, California, and honor them for their stewardship of this land. I appreciate that we've had a church a church perspective on the work of climate care. We've had a psychological perspective and a personal spiritual perspective. I'm going to bring the lens of a chaplain, a hospital chaplain, who I'm trained to meet people in their spiritual needs. I work as a hospital chaplain to assess people and assess their spiritual needs, often in the deepest of crises, and apply the appropriate intervention. Chaplaincy education is great for everybody. I love it. And those who want to read more may see the spiritual assessment and intervention model. But basically, it's different kinds of listening skills, different kinds of, depending on what the person's spiritual need is, we give them different kinds of attention. And knowing something about this can help anybody, whether you're a professional or whether you do not identify as especially emotionally intelligent. Learning these skills can help you to meet especially young people in their time of crisis and not let that generational divide keep us from meeting them in their needs where they are. And I really appreciate what Dr. Gillespie said earlier about how we're not in a mental health crisis per se. You know, the sane parts of us are the parts of us that are struggling right now. And I want to say the same thing about spiritual needs. Maybe people feel when they have deep spiritual needs, they start to feel, oh, my faith isn't strong enough, or oh, this is a problem. But it's really important to see that spiritual needs are an invitation from God that brings us closer to God, and deepens our spiritual walk as we strive to dig down deep and meet those spiritual needs, or find people that can meet them, because very often we cannot meet spiritual needs ourselves. There's a lot of spirituality these days that is kind of podcastable, as in somebody can create it and you can consume it in the privacy of your earbuds. But a lot of spiritual practice really requires friendship and relationship and mentorship and pastors and teachers and loved ones in your church or other spiritual communities. So we learn how to give these things to one another. So in the spiritual assessment and intervention model, we talk about 3 different kinds of spiritual needs. One is the need to know that you belong and are beloved. And we give people affirmation to help them meet this spiritual need. Another is the need to know a sense of meaning and direction. And when people don't have that, they feel lost and confused. And so we give like clarifying kind of attention, listening kind of attention. And the other spiritual need is when we end up getting into interpersonal or interrelational conflict, and we need the kind of pastoral presence that can be prophetic, that can, hold up a mirror, help us acknowledge our own self, help us stay in our own lane. And so those are 3 different kinds of spiritual care that we provide one another, and you'll learn more about them, I know. I just want to speak to the first one right now, because I know that if you are coming to this course, it might be hard for you. And it is a little hard for me too. So the first spiritual need is the spiritual need that all children kind of have endlessly. It's the need to know that you are loved and you're okay. And for many of us, that continues to be our primary spiritual need through life. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is an invitation from God to come close to God's great love for us. When a chaplain finds somebody in a hospital room who is deeply in this spiritual need, they're not going to be self-aware. They're not going to believe that they deserve the chaplain's attention. And so they're often going to say, oh, thank you. That's so nice of you to visit me. Surely you have more important people to go see. Or surely there's something else that is a better use of your time. And they might even apologize to the chaplain when they don't have a prayer request. That happened to me yesterday. I said, what would you like me to pray for you? And this kid was like, unable to think of anything he needed for himself, because he didn't have that sense of being well loved and cherished. And I just talk about this because whereas a chaplain might deal with that one-on-one personality, oh, hey, we give them affirmation. We say, oh, these are the things I like about you. We help them to pay attention to themselves. We as humans in a heating world need to have that kind of care for ourselves collectively. And that is really hard because our sin is so much on display. And so we suffer from despair perhaps, but also we suffer from a kind of abandonment of like, oh, humanity, hopefully God will come do something else. And forget that we are powerful, that we are gifted with many amazing qualities, that there's something amazing about humans, and that God will be working with us and through us to do the work that we have to do to cool and clean and heal the planet. That work is not going to be done without us. It's going to be done through us. We have amazing things to do. We have beautiful things to do. And our faith is being called up as such an important, helpful, inspiring resource right now. So I thank every one of you who is answering that call. And I hope that you can feel good about yourselves for being here and for feeling that spiritual need that is going to be answered as we do this self-reflection of seeing that God has blessed us and brought us to this place. And as we strive to help one another through that, as we affirm each other, as we work with and encourage and inspire one another, just keep those relationships going. And I think I'm going to end a minute early because I feel like I've said what I need to say. But looking at all your faces and your little photos makes me happy. I just feel this beautiful sense that God has called us for this work, and God has called each of you to something really wonderful, and I hope you appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Talitha, for those warm words, for meeting us where we're at and encouraging us to see this collective crisis through the lens of faith and what God is calling us to at this point. Thank you. Well, now that we've had a chance to hear from our panel of experts, we would now like to open up some time for you three to talk with each other, to say what was interesting or what got sparked by what your fellow panelists shared. And after you've had a chance to talk amongst yourselves, Jess is going to jump on and moderate the Q&A. So one more time for our viewers, please know that you are warmly invited to drop your questions into the chat, and Jess will tee them up as they come.
I might jump in just to say how much I've appreciated, and this is, when we talk about multifaceted perspectives, what it means to have heard from each of the speakers from such different experiences and awarenesses. I loved that you shared your personal story, Doug, and it was really moving, and I think so important that we do that. I was very interested in what you brought up about ritual. And it sounded to me like you had a bit of experience there. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the work or a ritual that you have facilitated around eco and climate distress and what it does bring forth in going through that kind of gate of grief and loss, particularly. On
the area of ritual, I'll just say that for me, Joanna Macy has been a very important mentor, and probably for many of you as well. And paying attention to how physical action, I just feel like I can go and talk somewhere for a while, but especially with students, I've noticed this. If I also include like some kind of ritual, with that, some kind of expression of either lament, and here's where I do focus probably a little more on lament, and I need to be, I'm particularly interested in Talitha, just this sense of also just encouraging people that to love and cherished, and to think about rituals around that kind of thing as well. But I just this sense that things happen in us. That aren't just intellectual. There aren't, that needs to be engaged as well. And some of the stuff I've done is fairly based on Joanna Macy, but other times it just comes out of like I just collaborated with a wonderful colleague in southern Michigan, and we were trying to figure out what to do with clay and fire, and came up with this I think beautiful ritual around that as well. So it's just to me a creative kind of area. I'll just say that I was particularly, and I think I already mentioned, interested in this aspect of not thinking about this as an individual pathology kind of thing, but recognizing it as a kind of sanity. And I guess I'm particularly interested in what you see as the role of the psychologist, the role of talk therapy in helping people to engage in activism. Like how do you help move people towards that kind of activism that's needed on climate?
Yes, thanks, Doug. It's a great question, because I think the other word that needs to be there is sustained climate activism, because what can happen, particularly with young people, is they can jump in, they can go full bore, they're full of distress, very understandably, and passion, and burn out quite quickly. And that's a lot of the work we do now, is how to actually help people find a very sustaining and sustainable form of activism. And I think this is where the getting together in dialogue circles, discussion groups, whatever, is really important, because just as you talked about working through your emotions at a very raw time with the Good Grief Network, which does fantastic work, that these kinds of things, just like the course, and can enable a way of coming together and working it through. And what research shows, and this includes stuff I did, is that through being able to discuss it and really bring up a lot of things that we do tend to repress or feel that we can't say out loud because it sounds too horrifying or despairing or whatever, that we build up a form of not only resilience but maturity. And I believe very passionately that there's a developmental path that gets involved when we do find ways of engaging with the climate crisis in community, with that space for caring, for sharing, for exploring the spiritual, the psychological, all of those dimensions. And then I think it feels very natural to move into action, and that action is sustainable.
Can I jump in on that question too? I love the question of like what do we need professionals for, and where can we have community care? Because there's something in the professionalization of care that becomes exclusive and capitalist, and you can only access it if you jump through these hoops or you have money. Like if you have money, you can access it all the time. Otherwise, you have to prove to a counselor that you have these things, I know that we always need professionals, and I know we need them as a safety net, but I also just hope that we can encourage our churches and our activist circles and the circles that we move in to be able to try to provide some mutual aid there. I had a friend a week ago who was meeting. We were playing some music in the playground. Our toddlers were going nearby, and he spilled all his things about career, and then was like, "I guess I should see therapy," And I was like, or you can just talk to a friend right now. Yeah, sure, you can see therapy, but like there's times at which people feel, because of the professionalization of care, that it's wrong to share your distress with a friend. There may be friends that can't handle distress, but we can all work on building that capacity. These are skills that can be shared. And the book that I wrote, I basically hope that it helps grandparents understand their grandchildren. And if we can do that, then, you know, because they already love them. You start with a new therapist, they don't already love you, but your grandparents already love you. They just need a little help in understanding you more. So that's my hope there, is that we can build some community care to extend and supplement where we must have professional care.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's no way that professional care can extend to everyone. And as I said, psychology, psychotherapists all have their own journey to go, because they too have come out of a Western individualistic model of practice. And there's a lot of reworking that needs to happen. And that's why we need courses similar to what Jess and Blair have done for all helping professions and health professions to come to a much more collective and collaborative form of engagement through community, rather than this kind of one-to-one professionalization model that you draw the problems out there with, you know.
I'll just say then to Talitha, yeah, or you can talk too, that I really appreciated this point about being well loved and cherished, and partly just your sense of recognizing that that's something that that the people you're talking to need to hear this, and I'm just as kind of a follow up to that, this sense of how do people get it, or how do you help, how do we get that deep in our bones, that a deep sense that we're loved and cherished, and where have you seen, I guess, how have you seen that happen, or where have you seen that happen especially?
Sometimes it happens when they fall in love for the first time, and then suddenly they're like this rush of like, oh, the universe loves me and God does too, and I love everything. Like sometimes that's when it happens, especially with a teenager, you know, hormones are fun, right? And sometimes it happens in church, and sometimes it happens on a retreat when you have like, have you ever gone on retreat and then at the end you all write little notes to each other and pass them around so everybody gets a little basket of affirmations? And sometimes it happens like between you and God and the night sky, and like, it just happens. I can't make it happen. But I can celebrate it when it does, and I can encourage people to be super loving towards one another, and to find specific things that they like and appreciate and can say. There's books written on love languages and such, and how do you get through to people really is a question, but sometimes it happens. It's beautiful when it does.
Yeah.
And I would say to that, and it's answering a little bit Melissa's question here in the chat, that, you know, the feeling of love and connection is not just between human and human. It's between ourselves and our living world. And yes, you know, we can feel pretty terrible when we see the damage that is there. But I think seeing yourself in kinship as an ally, I mean, as that beautiful quote came from before about when you care for country will care for us. And I think that includes emotionally and psychologically and spiritually. And I don't think, to answer Melissa, that was about we necessarily are going to feel better as things become. Well, it's that we feel more connected, more committed, more purposeful, more connected, more within communities of care, that coming into a greater engagement can facilitate. an initiation. It is that, but initiation does bring us into a more expanded engagement with all of life.
And Talitha, you wanted to respond to that question from Melissa as well?
I really liked Dr. Gillespie's answer, so I think I'm going to let that stand. I had said in the chat that I might, yeah, I think sometimes we look down on, like, I'm just going to feel better, you know, and that maybe then I will be kind of ignoring my pain in a way, like that I'm just going to get a little false comfort or something like that. But I don't know, I work in the hospital, I see what a little pain medicine can do. Like feeling a little bit more comfortable can help so much in so many ways. So I think you get to choose what you do with the extra energy that you get when you feel a little better. Maybe you use it to despair more ragingly, or to move forward into action. Each person chooses, but it's helpful to help one another not feel terrible.
Great. So we have some questions about the structure of the course and how the course works. So I'll pass on to Blair to share about that in a minute. But we also have a question from Kate here. I'm looking through the lens of spiritual direction. Do you see this course as supportive for a spiritual director? Perhaps Doug or Talitha, do you have some suggestions around that?
I think it's a great idea. Yes.
Yeah, I would
I'm not a spiritual director myself. I'm just friends with a lot of them, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me that it would work very well for a spiritual director. I mean, I see there's a lot in common. I mean, what is interesting is that there isn't as much of the communal aspect, although I think with my spiritual direction, I'm always being asked questions about how I'm relating to other people and how I'm seeing God at work in other people. And so I think it's very much related.
Thanks. And there's also a great question here from Andrew. Could any of you talk about the language for what is going on? Climate crisis, apocalypse, the ecological transition, different ones at different times. And we talk in the course a little bit about some research that Reverend Dr. Lee Shade has done around kind of which language works better within church contexts and triggers people a bit less. What reflections do our panelists have?
Oh, there's been so many terms. I've been involved now for 16 years and we've worked our way through a great many of them. Look, I think you have to find the one that actually for you feels grounded in your reality and experience and fits easily in your tongue, on your tongue. They do all have resonances, you know, that's absolutely true. And I've just finished writing a paper where I've switched between climate change and climate crisis, and really there's quite a difference in saying those two terms. And so you have to think of your audience a lot as well as what sits with you. I wouldn't encourage apocalypse myself. I think there's a lot of struggle around doomerism, feelings of doomerism generally. I'm not talking here from within a Christian lens here, but just that, and it is commonly used now, apocalypse and even apocalyptic. And apocalyptic imaginings tend to take us out of a frame of action and put us into a sense of powerlessness and non-engagement. And I think it's just not true of ecology and ecosystems that you know, there's always life forces at work that we need to honour.
Were you going to say something, Talitha, too? Or?
Yeah, but you can go first, Doug.
Well, to me, the one little added comment I'll make coming here from a theological perspective is that I also don't use apocalypse very often, but there is an opportunity for me in the use of that term, because that is, usually in popular culture, it simply means things like the destruction of everything and that there's nothing I can do about it. But when I work with that language, I try to turn it around a bit or bring it within the Christian context, that part of what I understand have been the purpose of apocalyptic literature was to encourage people to do the right thing in spite of the fact that it looks like all is lost. That, you know, in spite of the fact that it looks like that the dragon of empire is really in control and can do things. Just say no. I mean, the spirit of life is at work. The spirit of creation is at work. And so do the right thing, and so anyway, that's part of how I try to work with apocalyptic.
Yeah, I think apocalypse is a powerful word in religious language, and it means a revealing. It means a opening. I use that a lot. There was one day, I don't know if this made this into your news, but we had a day when the sun did not come out and the street lights stayed on through noon, all the way through the day. So that day deserved the word apocalypse. It was really revealing. But I'll say that I have switched from using climate crisis to using climate emergency, and I like that language.
Thanks, Talitha. For those of us who were in Sydney during those Black Summer bushfires, that word apocalypse was also what kind of instantly came to mind with the darkness and the smoke. So yeah, maybe not the most helpful language in all contexts, but also something that comes up a lot and that we do have to talk about. And then often linking it back to those concepts of creation, care, and loving what God loves. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for your talks, for your answers to the questions, for being willing to be open and vulnerable with us and to share your knowledge and expertise. We really, really appreciate that. And there've also, as I mentioned, been quite a few questions about the course itself. So Blair, would you like to tell us a bit more about how everyone can go and enroll in the course and we can start learning together?
I would love to. Oh, I'm feeling so excited. I've got that, like, you know, it's our course's birthday feeling. It was the third trimester feeling like, come on, it's time. We got to get it out there. And now it's born. So with that, woohoo, I'm going to pop the link into the chat, but you don't have to go to it now because I'm going to share my screen so we can look at a couple of websites together. One moment. And I'm going to have to hide my controls so that we're all looking at the right tabs. All right, everybody. This is our page on a website called Thinkific, well, on a platform called Thinkific that hosts courses. So when you go to climatepastoralcare.thinkific.com, it will route you to this site where you can see a little overview of the course. You can check out a little free preview of some of our pre-modules, and you can purchase it for $200. That's Australian. That works out to about $125 US. I'd like to point out that this is a self-paced course. And the reason that it was important for us to come up with a self-paced course is because we're aware that many people who would want to take this course are often required to wear many hats in their professional roles or the roles within churches. So we thought, let people take this course with the time that they have. That said, we have created a couple of tools for connecting with other people as you go through the course, and I'll get to those in just a moment. But first, let's move through the content itself. We do have a couple of pre-modules, which are fairly comprehensive about climate change and about eco-theology generally. Those are available for free as previews. We hope that everybody comes into this course already with some awareness of what the climate emergency is and what theology and ecology have to do with each other. And from there, we move into 4 different parts. We talk about climate change and mental health more generally. We introduce some of these major terms for different forms of climate distress, such as climate anxiety, such as ecological grief, what mental health has to do with climate change. so that we all start out this course on the same page on those major topics. And we have 4 assignments that go throughout. So you can see that assignment 1 breaks up that first part right there, writing an ecological prayer and a prayer for the climate crisis. Then we move into part 2, where we focus on considerations for specific groups. We talk about the importance of looking at social political factors and race and ethnicity when we're applying climate pastoral care. We talk about pastoral care for peoples of the land. We point out some considerations for pastoral care during and immediately after natural disaster response, care for climate migrants. You see our assignment 2 comes and breaks up that content as well. We also share some specific tips for activists and scientists, as well as children and parents. While we have done our best to load up each of these modules with a synthesis of all this research that we've been doing over the years, they are so full of external links and videos and books and ways to expand your knowledge in any of these areas as well as you go through the course. It's been really exciting to be exposed to all this material and to pull it together in this way. Then we move into part 3, where we zoom in even more on climate pastoral care and the church. We talk about how to be a good pastor to climate anxious people, and we invite you to write a sermon or a public talk as appropriate to your context. We talk about climate denial and strategies for dealing with congregational conflict around the issue. We talk about ecophobic theologies as opposed to ecophilic theologies. And we end on a note about hope, agency, and community. And after our 4th assignment, which is shared with Jess and myself as the course writers and moderators, we also invite you to reflect on a beautiful moving story at the end. It's final reflections on the course with more appendices and more of a wealth of resources that can deepen your learning and understanding in whatever direction you're feeling called into by the end of the course. And they end with a nice certificate, and then you become part of our community of alumni forever, for as long as you'd like to stay associated with this course. And we really do hope that this knowledge does not remain solely with you, solely in your head, but really is something that you can take into your communities, something that is very practical. You can see it's a lot of material to go through. Since we haven't had our first student yet, it's going to be interesting to see what the average time to go through it all is. But since it is self-paced, we hope that you can find it, you can break it up into chunks that will be useful and manageable to you. There are a couple of buttons on this page that you can click to get yourself enrolled, as well as some wonderful testimonials from our readers. Yeah, and after you click on your enroll today, you get a welcome email that points you to some of our other community resources. This climate pastoral care course has a permanent webpage on Waterspirit's website as well. So if you walk away from this webinar, you're not sure exactly where it was. Wait, what was that website again? Thinkific, what kind of word is that? You can always go to www.waterspirit.org and find our climate pastoral care course page under our programs tab. So the climate pastoral care course not only has a button to enroll, which takes you to the Thinkific site, we have also created a Facebook group for enrolled students who would like to become enrolled and would like to find a group of people to do it with, and for alumni of the course. So you can click on that and head on over to the Facebook page to connect with other people if you don't already have your community who'd like to go through the course together. And periodically, we will be holding drop-in sessions for anybody who is currently enrolled or has completed the course, who would like to meet other people who've taken it, would like to ask questions about the material, who would like to talk about how they're applying this material to their home communities. So we've scheduled our first drop-in session for Friday, December 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the US, or in Australia, Saturday, December 3rd at 11 a.m. And then we'll post periodic updates here on this Waterspirit page and on our events calendar, indicating when our next sessions are. We are currently estimating that we'll be holding these about once a month. Let's see. And from there, we've also got our Facebook page, as we mentioned. We hope that we get to see you all there, and I wish you the best of luck going through this course.
So that now concludes our formal launch. Thank you, Blair and Jess, for walking us through your Climate Pastoral Care online course. And thank you to our special guests again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that you do find this resource blesses you and those in your faith community. I'd like to conclude tonight or today, for those joining with us, with a Jesuit blessing. Lord, grant us the wisdom to care for the earth and till it. Help us to act now for the good of future generations and all your creatures. Help us to become instruments of a new creation, founded on the covenant of your love. Amen. Thank you.